The delivery van pulled up to the glass tower at the exact moment the most powerful CEO in the city was throwing her 12th specialist out of the conference room. 20 years in a wheelchair, millions poured into hospitals and research wings and private consultations. Every promise ended the same way, with apology dressed up as science. The single-father delivery driver had only come to drop off a sealed envelope and leave. But when he bent down to pick up a pen that had fallen near her wheel, he watched her left toes curl inward in a way no one else had ever noticed. Everything changed from that moment on. If you believe fate can reverse direction in a single instant, stay with this story until the very end. The pen hit the marble floor at 11:47 in the morning, and no one in the room paid it any attention except Edward Carter. He had been standing near the door for less than 2 minutes, holding a padded delivery bag and a signature tablet, doing everything right for a man who understood his position in a room like that one. Tinted glass, 40 stories up, a conference table long enough to seat a small government. The woman at the head of it was Charlotte Whitmore, and she had just ended a session with a panel of 6 medical specialists who had flown in from 3 different cities and charged combined fees that would have paid Edward's rent for the next 4 years. They had told her what she had been told 11 times before. The spinal cord injury she had sustained 2 decades ago was too old, too established, too irreversible. The window for meaningful recovery, they said, had closed long before she had ever thought to open it again. Charlotte had not yelled. She was not that kind of woman. She had simply gone very still in the way that extreme cold goes still. And then she had told each of them, one by one, to leave. Theodore Sloan, the most decorated neurologist in the room, had lingered as though his reputation entitled him to a different dismissal. It had not. Edward had been buzzed up because the envelope required a physical signature from the executive named on the label. He was not supposed to witness any of this. He had walked in on the tail end of something enormous, and he knew it, and so he had done what any sensible person in borrowed shoes would do. He had gone invisible. Then Charlotte's pen rolled off the arm of her wheelchair and landed near the left wheel. Edward bent to retrieve it. At that angle, in that light, with his eyes at the level of her footrest, he saw her left foot shift, the outer edge of her shoe pressed almost imperceptibly against the cold metal of the chair frame, and the toes inside it, the little toe, and the one beside it, curled inward. A half-second response. Reflexive. Not voluntary, not dramatic, barely there at all. But it was there. Edward straightened slowly. He held the pen out and said nothing for a moment. Then he said it, and could not stop himself from saying it. Her nerve pathways aren't completely gone. The room did not react immediately. It processed. Then Theodore Sloan laughed. A short sound with no warmth in it. Jonathan Pierce, the company's chief operating officer, looked at Edward the way a man looks at something that has wandered through the wrong door. Madison Brooks, Charlotte's personal assistant, froze near the window. Charlotte Whitmore said nothing. She looked at Edward Carter, really looked at him, the delivery jacket, the scuffed boots, the tiredness around his eyes, and asked the first question she had asked in a very long time that she did not already know the answer to. What did you just see? She told him he had 5 minutes. Not 4, not 10, 5. Everyone else was to wait outside. Madison stayed. Edward Carter was 35 years old and had been a single father for the last 4 of them. He lived with his daughter Ava in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building where the elevator worked on most days. He drove for a medical logistics company, which meant his cargo was usually lab samples and sealed case files rather than retail packages, and he was careful with all of it because he was careful with most things. Before the driving, there had been other work. For nearly 6 years, Edward had been a rehabilitation equipment technician for a mid-sized medical device company, a job that put him in hospitals and outpatient clinics and home care settings 5 days a week, setting up motorized mobility frames, calibrating electrical stimulation units, adjusting orthotic supports for people whose bodies had stopped cooperating with their intentions. He was not a clinician. He held no license to diagnose or treat. What he held instead was the particular kind of knowledge that accumulates when you spend 6 years watching people try to come back from injuries that everyone else has already written off. He had watched men in their 50s learn to control their grip again after strokes. He had watched a 23-year-old woman take her first unassisted step 9 months after a car crash that had left her declared non-ambulatory. He had watched the small things that preceded recovery, not the dramatic moments. but the quiet biological arguments a body makes before anyone in authority is willing to listen. His wife, Rachel, had died 3 years before any of this. She had gone to 4 different doctors over 14 months, with symptoms that each one had logged as something minor and sent home. By the time the correct picture assembled itself, it was too late to act on. Edward had sat with that for a very long time. He did not blame any one doctor. He blamed the way the system handled people whose symptoms did not announce themselves loudly enough to interrupt the existing paperwork. Ava was 7 now, with the kind of steady practicality that sometimes appears in children who have learned early that the world does not pause for grief. She was the reason Edward did not let himself fall apart, and also, without knowing it, the reason he had begun to look at things more carefully than most people thought necessary. He had not planned to say anything in that conference room. He had planned to get a signature, thank the woman, and take the elevator back down to where his van was double parked with its hazard lights on. But the curl of those toes had hit something in the center of his chest that he recognized immediately, because he had spent years learning to recognize it. The body saying something the chart was not saying. He knew that if he walked away without speaking, he would carry it. He had already carried Rachel. He could not carry this too. Charlotte Whitmore had built the Whitmore Biodyne Corporation from a hospital bed. She had done it because there was nothing else to do, and because doing nothing felt like a second injury she was not willing to survive. The accident had happened 2 months after her 21st birthday. On a night, she had been driving home from a charity fundraiser for a children's hospital, which had always struck her as a particular cruelty of timing. A driver running a red light, a collision that lasted less than 3 seconds and rearranged the rest of her life. The paralysis had been immediate and complete, according to every assessment made in the weeks that followed. Her family had done everything a wealthy family could do. Private clinics in 3 countries, experimental rehabilitation programs, spinal cord stimulation trials, consultations with surgeons who had published landmark research. The prognosis, delivered in various tones of gentleness and authority, had never materially changed. By her 30th birthday, Charlotte had stopped expecting medicine to surprise her. What she expected instead was results from her company, from her staff, from herself. She had channeled everything that might have become despair into structure. Whitmore Biodyne had grown into one of the most influential medical technology firms in the country, which was either a remarkable story of resilience or a very expensive way of not being allowed to stop moving. Charlotte knew it was probably both. What the public version of her story did not include was the sensation she had stopped reporting somewhere around her 9th or 10th year of specialist visits, a burning that ran from the base of her spine down into her left thigh, a tightening that came on when weather changed, something that felt, obscenely, like electricity in a place that was not supposed to conduct it anymore. Each time she had mentioned these sensations, she had been told about phantom pain, about residual neural firing, about the brain's difficulty accepting permanent loss. After enough repetitions of the same explanation, she had stopped offering the information. If the experts found it meaningless, she had decided it was meaningless. Jonathan Pierce had been with Whitmore Biodyne for 11 years, and he ran the company's operational architecture with a precision that Charlotte had come to rely on so completely that she had not noticed, until recently, how much of her own daily reality had been routed through his judgment. Jonathan was not malicious. He was the kind of person who genuinely believed that stability was the highest form of care, and who had gradually come to equate Charlotte's comfort with his own efficiency. Theodore Sloan represented the consensus. He had treated Charlotte twice over the years, published 3 papers that referenced her case without identifying her, and arrived at every interaction with the settled authority of a man who believed his conclusions were the same thing as facts. Neither of them had ever been unkind to her. They had only, in their different ways, stopped looking. Charlotte gave Edward 5 minutes, and he used none of them the way she had expected. He did not claim to be able to heal her. He stated this plainly at the start, with a directness that was unusual enough in that room to be briefly disorienting. He was not a physician. He could not make a diagnosis. He might be entirely wrong, but if the damage to her spinal cord was as complete and as final as every report in the last 20 years maintained it was, then 3 things he had observed in the last 90 seconds did not fit. He laid them out without dramatics. The muscle mass in Charlotte's left lower leg was not consistent with 2 decades of full disuse. Complete long-term paralysis produced a specific pattern of atrophy, He had seen it on dozens of patients, and her left calf did not match that pattern.